Yeah, listen, I appreciate you taking the time today. How are things?
They're going well. They're going well. Things are a little bit dire here in downtown Toronto, but
Nice gray February,
yeah, grey February and cold, and yeah, got to get like everyone else.
Awesome, man. Well, listen, I'm really excited to dive into your new book, The Tough Stuff, 7 Hard Truths About Being a Head Coach. But before we do that, I'd love for you to give viewers and listeners a little bit more background on yourself and your coaching career.
Yes, I'm an Aussie rules coach, which is a funny thing to say.
The biggest pitch in
Yeah, big field, big cricket-sized field. For those who haven't heard of Aussie rules or AFL, you might be familiar with it if you follow the NFL. A lot of the punters come over. They come from our sport. Probably the biggest winter sport, we'll call it, in Australia. It's hard to explain in words. You would need to YouTube it to really get it. But
it is an awesome game, though. It's having had the pleasure of being over in Australia and going to a game in watching the Sydney Swans. For folks who aren't familiar, the size of the pitch, the speed, the athleticism. Although I did hear that it was to keep cricketers fit. It was the original. Is that true? I think that's a level of fitness that cricketers don't exactly need. It's pretty impressive what the AFL athletes can achieve.
Yeah, that's the original story. Yeah, to keep the cricketers fit, and kind of went from there and became a religion in Melbourne. You know this. You've seen hockey in Canada, but there are very few sports, I think, globally that have that kind of religious element to them that Aussie Rules does in Melbourne in particular. I'd say probably soccer in Brazil and probably the UK, hockey in Canada. It's kind of at that level of fanaticism. If you've ever, the thing that I want people to experience is 100,000 people at the Melbourne Cricket Ground watching a game of Aussie Rules football. You've never seen anything like that in your life. And
imagine the energy is something else.
Yeah, so that's my world. And then, so I came up through the elite junior development system, didn't get drafted, and then kind of got spat out into coaching at about 23. So I'm quite a young coach for Aussie Rules, because in our world, you can go back and play suburban level and actually make a little bit of money and kind of have a bit of a let's call it a semi-professional career. Whilst you're working a corporate job or being a tradie or whatever you do. So.
And how did you know, Cody, if I jump in, how did you know that you wanted to get into coaching at that age? Was it you just always knew, or what inspired that?
I don't think I always knew. Ironically, there was kind of I fell out of love with playing the game, and coaching kind of made me fall back in love with it. And ironically, it was the thing that kind of crippled me as a player was that I didn't have an off switch. Like I couldn't find flow in the game. If I was thinking too much, I couldn't really get into the game. And so ironically, that's a skill in coaching, is the analysis piece, and almost kind of like bordering on over analysis.
Yeah, for sure.
I was a smart player that crippled me as in my kind of career aspirations playing, but it was advantageous on the coaching side. So yeah, I was lucky enough to get into it really early, and that sounds weird now. I'm 36 and I've been coaching for 13 years.
Nice.
Even coming over here and getting to work with the national team, which is what I coach now, the men's Canadian National team. There's international tournaments every year, and so I get to work with elite athletes. A lot of them come out of youth sports in Canada, and they don't have an avenue to play rugby or hockey or basketball or soccer after university, and they find our sport, and so I get to work with those guys, and it's really cool.
Awesome, man. Well, listen, I really it's been fascinating digging into your new book, and this idea of 7 hard truths about being a head coach. I think people listening in, even if you're not a coach per se, if you're a practitioner, if you're a nutritionist, you're a strength coach, the coaching aspect is such a big part of making athletes better, and even in a clinical setting. I really like when you kick off the book with a great quote from England rugby head coach Eddie Jones in the first chapter, and I'll read it out here for listeners. Coaching is difficult. You're supposed to know everything and offer constant belief and hope to a huge number of mostly complex individuals. At the same time, everyone thinks they can do the job better than you. you're never short of someone telling you what you're doing wrong. Can you unpack that quote for listeners?
Yeah, so that's kind of the wrap up of the first chapter, and the first chapter is called "Everyone Thinks You're an Idiot," or the first hard truth, really, called "Everyone Thinks You're an Idiot." And when I started writing the book, it was actually a bit of a central theme to why I wanted to write about it, is because there is this dynamic of, which is quite bizarre, in that you can have an entire career path and you get to the top. So you're, in the NBA, you're one of the 30 best people in the world at that time in your job, and everyone thinks you're an idiot, and everyone thinks that they can do the job better than you. And it's just this really bizarre dynamic that does exist in other professions, but I kind of want to point it out and really emphasize the fact that external pressure, obviously impacts coaching. It impacts your ability to coach. It impacts, it's not lost on coaches that people think this about them, and that they, that people suddenly dislike them because they brought their favorite player off at a key portion of the game. People are well aware of it, and it weighs on head coaches. And I couldn't find a better quote about it than what Eddie had said in his book.
Well, it's fascinating because you talk about, assistant coaches and, the skills that you have as an assistant coach, but how that in and of itself differs completely from even being a head coach. And if we talk about even the idea that everyone thinks they know better than you, I mean, even within a coaching staff, you have competitive personalities and when we talk psychology, disagreeableness is sort of the flip side of that sometimes. And so you've got potentially coaches on your coaching staff who think that they've got a better idea or could do it a certain way. Can you talk a little bit about that and how, if it's getting everybody on the same page, or how does a head coach start to block out all that noise?
Yeah, and I would expand it even further. I mean, some of the harshest critics that you'll have are actually in your own building. So again, going back to the idea of hard truths, is we're often sold this idea that, because we're the Toronto Maple Leafs, or because we're the Toronto Raptors, or, that everyone's pulling in the same direction, even from the staff. But in reality you have, one, complex individuals. Then you have those competitive individuals that are trying to take the next step. Then you have other staff who think the same as everyone else. They think their idea is better or the right one, and the coach made the wrong call or is just a buffoon or whatever. And so I really just wanted to point out that often some of your most severe critics can be in the building and be, the people that sit next to you on a day-to-day basis. And I think it becomes a little bit of an art in assembling, I think, the kind of artistry of building staffs and building internal groups within organizations is really going to start to come to the fore, if it hasn't already. I actually think it has. You see good staffs win now. And so, but it's just something that we don't really pay attention to, all the dynamics between the staff, and particularly how they're serving the head coach, who's the ultimate decision maker.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, it makes me think about how in elite sport now we see players going from their playing career to a managerial career within years. We see it a lot in Premiership football, likes of the Gerrards and the Lampards and the Rooney kind of jumping straight into this. They obviously have tremendous experience as players and resumes and accolades. And similarly in basketball, Steve Nash is worked a little bit in Golden State, but now he's the head coach over. And these are obviously elite all-time talents. But what is it about just transitioning over to being a head coach that doesn't necessarily being the most talented player on the team or in the past, if that doesn't always translate to being the best head coach, does it? Yeah.
One of the quotes that I use in there from Steven Gerrard kind of hits the nail on the head, is that there's just something different in there. This is one who's been a captain his whole life. Captain of Liverpool, captain of England, 300, 400, 500 games. So think about like even a team address and like addressing teammates. And then his quotes is, the most nervous presentation I've ever had was when I had to address Glasgow Rangers for the first time.
Which is saying something in and of itself, right? This is a guy who the greatest comeback in Champions League, scores 3 goals in the second half or assists one. Like, the level of accomplishments is off the charts. And then to your point, he's in a room, he's the head coach, he's addressing this team for the first time. And this is one of the most nerve-wracking things that he's ever done.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And that's why I think that quote is just brilliantly simple, because it just sums up that there's just something different. The eyeballs on you are just different now when you're the one in the spotlight. And yes, you're the one in the spotlight when you're the captain and you're England and all this sort of stuff. But then you move it over to the type of expectations that are on head coaches in particular, and it changes again. And what's really interesting, the speed of change over the last kind of 20 years has really facilitated this, in that, the change in sporting environments where the head coach used to do basically everything. They would certainly do, maybe they might have someone like yourself come in and consult and build some programs. But for the most part, like fitness and data and analysis and all these things, that was a coach's job. Like, we forget that 20 years ago, here's another example from the book. So when Tony Granato becomes head coach of the Colorado Avalanche, he takes over the greatest team probably still ever assembled. If you're a hockey fan, you could probably make an argument. Wah and Sakic and Forsberg and Foote and Hayduk and all these guys. Takes over after 3 months as an assistant coach. He becomes the head coach. They fire Bob Hartley. So he's got three months of coaching experience, period.
Yeah.
But then only has one assistant coach. That's the only person on staff. So in the early 2000s, probably the greatest hockey team maybe ever assembled has one head coach and one assistant coach. Now you think of all the different departments that, have all these PhDs in them now. You've got performance, you've got data, you've got
PhDs.
Right. And then the coach has to manage all of those departments. So that's what I mean. The speed of change has really facilitated a lot of this, on top of the fact that there's just this spotlight on you as the head coach and the ultimate decision maker, who's already imposing enough to itself. Now the landscape has changed to the point where you've got all these PhDs rolling through your office 24/7, updating you on what the latest changes are and the players are doing. So,
yeah, a lot of demands on the coach. And one of the areas that I really enjoyed in your book is, you talk about Dan Quinn, the ex-head coach of the Atlanta Falcons, and that idea that words matter, and that the head coach's words, even back in the day, whether you're playing amateur sport, that moment you have with the coach where you have a one-to-one and it's that 5 or 10 or 15 minutes, that for the player or for the performance staff or whoever, that's a really important 5, 10 or 15 minutes from the head coach. But of course, the head coach has that 5, 10 minutes over and over and over again in the day, and it's tiring, it's exhausting. But that piece in the book that you talk about, Quinn realizing that those are really important moments. And, can you speak to that idea of the power of words and how, those touch points are so important?
Well, I'll just say what an amazing coach and guy he is. Called me from the beach in Hawaii to do this book interview. And just paid attention to so much. Like, I really wanted to talk to him in particular. Never been a head coach before, level, and do what they did with the Falcons. Paid attention to all these things, and that's what I found really fascinating. Was it wasn't oblivious to him. Also trying to navigate an environment that he'd never been in before, a head coaching role, the first time in the NFL. So, as soon as he said that quote, might just be another 10 minutes, but to the other person, it's the most important 10 minutes of their day. I highlighted it, like I almost, broke the page on my binder, because I'm like circling it so much. I'm like, that brilliant. And it's so true. And we so quickly overlook that because, again, it's the person, right? Everyone's coming to you for help and you're trying to solve problems, and you've got a training session, right, and your wife's calling you, telling you to come home for dinner, and all these different things are swirling around. But when second and slept all night because they're like, I got to talk to the coach about this thing tomorrow, and just take that anxiety out of the situation by just putting the phone down and, kind of being of service and recognizing that your power dynamic, that can more probably give it
Yeah, I mean, obviously at that level, and then even if we, to a similar degree, even, an S&C staff or other performance staff or medical, when those players come in, especially for certain players, injured players, younger players, that time that they have with that practitioner is really important. And then and to your point, even for the practitioner, that coach, that strength coach, that might be athlete number 12 that they've seen for the day. For a head coach or any type of coach, it's tough. It's a challenge, isn't it, to be able to maintain that level of energy and focus for the whole day, because everybody who sees that individual is, that's a big moment in their day, right?
Yeah. There's another great example that Darren Burgess gave me when he was at Arsenal. He was talking about Arsene Wenger and how no one would go into his office. There was essentially a lineup outside his office to talk to him because no one wanted to go and interrupt him. And so, Berger kind of just like walks in and asks his question and walks out, and he's like, "What are you guys doing?" And I talk about that in the book, but it's not anything other than just that power dynamic that we were talking about, and understanding that you're just intimidating, right? Just because of the title. And so even when you're someone like Arsene Wenger, who has been at Arsenal or was at Arsenal for 20 years and was so respected and so loved and had so many, it was like a family atmosphere. Yeah. And so like when you think about that, you're like, of course, if you're a family, you'd walk in and say your thing to the coach. Still, there was this atmosphere that no one wanted to disturb him. And that's just the power dynamic at play. Mm-hmm. And so being conscious of that and conscious of your impact, the impact of your title on other people and the impact of your power on other people is critical, because the thing to remember on the other side as well is that people bring their own interpretations of power to work with them. So if they come from a different culture that has a different power dynamic, they bring that with them to your environment. If someone has, a certain dynamic they grew up with their mother or father, they bring that with them. And so they then treat you in a way that is in line with their own understanding of how power dynamics work. 100%. So if you can have empathy for that and kind of try to understand that, and then understand that this isn't just head coaches, this is everyone. When the CEO walks onto the floor in a business, everyone sits up straighter and does their tie up a little bit, and they articulate their words a little bit clearer. Sure. Right? We just do it because we know there's a power influence in the building. There's just this natural reaction to it.
And that's a good segue into this kind of the flip side of that, really, which is another great line from the book, is that this great paradox of coaching you write about is that it's both not about you and entirely about you. Could you unpack that a little bit for viewers and listeners?
The great paradox of coaching, yeah. That's it in a nutshell. Is you have this dynamic where it's the progress of the organization, the progress of the team, you're there to serve. It's not about you, it's about them. It's about serving your players and making sure that everyone's taken care of and set up for success. But then you can't just leave it at that, because again, you have this dynamic as the leader where you're actually creating yourself in your team. And so I think what a lot of head coaches get wrong is that they don't understand both sides of that dynamic. So what I mean by that is your behavior, how you show up, becomes how your team is going to act. And so, it's so easy to sit here and go, it's not about me, I'm all about my players, I'm this and I'm that. But then your behavior doesn't line up to that either. So you're not creating what you're saying you're creating, this player-centric model that everyone wants to talk about now. Go and lock yourself in your office and close the door and no one will go in and talk to you. That's not a player-centric model. And so that's what you're actually creating in your culture. So the point is that it is a paradox, and we need to be aware of it, that any leader, not just head coaches, any leader is creating themselves. And so how you act, how you behave, how you speak to people is what they are going to go and do. And it's just contagion theory. Like, this is a proven thing. You become who you observe the most, and who you observe the most in a sporting environment, head coach.
And how does that, like, when we look at, basketball, football, I mean, styles are changing over the years, but when I grew up, I mean, there's a lot of Bobby Knight yelling, screaming, this is how we're going to motivate. We're going to, this is like, shut up and play, get your ass on the bench. Like, and now we see obviously an evolution in terms of being able to better communicate with individuals. And to your point previously, how people grew up, their culture, their environment, how they receive information, it's different for everybody, and we're getting a better handle on that now from a coaching standpoint, from a practitioner standpoint. But when we look at, I always think of a sport like American football, where we still have that sort of very top-down military style. We're going to do it this way. In researching the book and whatnot in different sports, like, is that something that some of those differences versus what are the similarities across the board? Like, can you speak to that?
A lot of differences, and again, those differences are born often out of competitive landscape of the sport, and then also some social inputs as well. And so earlier you said military, and it's funny because I've had two conversations about this earlier around the impact that kind of military ideas of leadership, post World War II, and kind of how that then flowed into society and is still being felt today. That traditional kind of top down, you go and do this, I'm the boss kind of idea.
And not to say that's always a bad thing. I mean, maybe it is, but just to, depending on the environment, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And so there's context to everything, but that as a blanket solution is probably the wrong way to consider it. Now you have this kind of new wave of coaches. Yeah, potentially more worldly. They have different views on leadership. They lead differently. They, gain enrollment and all these different types of things. The reason that I observe some haven't changed is because they haven't found someone to go through the wall first. That's one of my big kind of lessons from the book. Is a lot of people said to me that the NFL would change if someone saw success doing this. If someone stopped watching film and went home and spent time with their wife and their kids, and they won, everyone would follow along. Got some sleep, kept their health up, better cognition, better decision making when it counts. Right. But because no one has really used that as kind of a core philosophy, it's hard for someone else to go through the wall first. Like even your newer school guys, like a Sean McVay, like the word is obviously hyper aware, has all the kind of social skills in the world, can talk all day, but still is watching tape at 3 a.m.
Yeah, still running on 5 hours sleep, right?
Yeah, and he may be wired that way, and that's good for him. I think he's an amazing coach, but even that kind of newer wave, they're still pulled into you have to watch this much tape and you have to be there until you have to be the last one out of the office. And so it hasn't given permission for others to be able to take care of their well-being. It has happened in other sports, like the AFL is a great example where coach welfare and kind of a letting go of power has really started to occur. But yeah, I mean, there's impacts within the game themselves where, there's expectations of how you act. And until, someone wins, we're probably stuck with a lot of those things.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes I guess in any industry and business as well, that just idea of FaceTime and everything else, and whether you're the performance staff working with a team and just having to log these longer hours just to be at the facility. And to your point, sometimes that needs to be done and that's beneficial. But other times that over the course of a 12-month year, practitioners get run down, practitioners get tired, practitioners lack sleep, make poor decisions. They can't execute their skills to the best of their abilities because their own health is somewhat being compromised. And it's finding that line between, we're squeezing the lemon to get all that juice out, but at what point are we pushing too hard. And to your point, it's a challenging one, isn't it? When if no one else has gone through the wall with a different approach, then you're just going to, for lack of a better term, you're going to look a little bit lazy, aren't you? If you're not pushing as hard as the other teams and the other staffs, right?
Yeah. Well, and so let's think about this for a second as well. How grateful should mindfulness, meditation, and that whole practice be for Phil Jackson? Because if he doesn't have that success in 1993 or whatever it was, that gave permission for this whole wave to happen. Because it still could be a pseudoscience as far as the high performance sporting world is concerned, if that doesn't become the case study that it becomes. And again, there was really slow adoption. The science and everything obviously needed to continue to catch up. That wasn't the case study. It could still be an outsider to this whole conversation right now.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I always find it fascinating because these conferences, get-togethers, the belief of the players and the staff is always this really hugely important thing, which we could call placebo, right? I mean, if just believing that we're all doing this thing is such a huge, and it's statistically significant advantage, but then when we look at different evidence-based, we'll call it air quotes, tools, I mean, we're a lot more in the gray zone with a lot of this than we are just simply, everyone's practicing evidence-based, and if all you're doing is waiting for the study to come out to show you that this technique or this nutritional strategy is going to win, I mean, the train's already left the station, right? That's
what I love about coaching, because it plays out in real time, and you don't need it to work 999 times out of 1,000. You need it to work once, and so it's making that, let's be honest here, half of it is making shit up and trying to find solutions in the time. I'm not talking about the work that goes in prior, but in a game, half of it is I think this might be right for this one circumstance that we're in, because we've never been in that situation before. And so in that particular situation before. And so you're kind of making it up on the spot, as much as we want to say we plan and all these different things. If we're having a real conversation here where it's a best guess. And that's why I love it, is because you're constantly testing. Okay, I think our team can do this. I think our team can execute this play. I think we can squeeze them a little bit here and just get another 2 points out of this half. And so you're always playing that squeezing game, and you don't get the benefit of looking at the science as to whether, this type of play has worked. Right.
And that's what, I mean, the belief side of that, I mean, just, with Canada basketball, just watching Nick Nurse work and obviously seeing him with the Raptors and, his ability to draw up plays at the right time. But it's not just the fact that he's drawing up the play. It's this belief in the fact that what he's going to draw up is going to work. To your point and some of the points you make in the book, he could draw up whatever play it is. Just the fact that he's drawing it up in the way that he is, there's a belief that, hey, this is going to work out. We're going to get through this. And before we actually, I want to talk tactics here in a minute, but before we go there, circling back to the coaches with, when we talk about outcomes and, the Dan Quinns who had success, but obviously didn't quite get over the hump, or, in the book, you talk about Hugh Jackman, the ex-coach of the Cleveland Browns, who was, whatever his record was there, 5-30 some odd. And this idea of identity, right? We identify as athlete first, practitioner first, doctor first, psychologist first. And as a football coach, if you're, he identifies as a football coach first. But if you're losing all the time, what are you? You touch on that. Can you talk about that idea of identity and how, where's that intersection between I'm a guy who coaches versus I'm a coach number one, and then family man, and et cetera, et cetera.
The chapter title is You're Not a Coach, and the first little snippet is you're a person who coaches. And I think that really sums up my perspective on it. And yeah, there's quite a harrowing tale in there of of Hugh Jackson and coaches Oakland, does okay. I can't remember the circumstance why he left there, but ends up at the Cleveland Browns, and I mean, terrible record, and still haunts him to this day. And Sports Illustrated did a really confronting piece on him, basically saying like he by this because he identifies as a football coach first, and his personal circumstance, and only he can be the judge of what his identity is. But it seems as an industry that it's just gone too far that way, that we've kind of lost this idea of humanity and who we are as people and human beings. What's going to be written on our tombstones often is, and this comes from the Jackson story, he says something like, my win-loss record's going to be written on my tombstone. That was the bit where I was like, right, and is it? And is that a life well lived even if you are a successful coach and your win-loss record is written on your tombstone? Like, surely we need to have some sort of more well-rounded perspective on who we are as human beings for this to all work, because we work in the people business, and so surely our impact on other human beings, our family members, our daughters, our wives, our husbands, surely that is what we should be aiming for, and the team and the people in our building, rather than being, feeling wronged because you've got a 5-36 record as an NFL head coach. Don't get me wrong, it would bug the shit out of me that I had lost.
Yeah, as a competitor, it's natural, isn't it? But to your point earlier, I mean, he's a head coach in the NFL. Like, he's the 0.00001% of coaches at the most elite level to obtain that position. So from a perspective standpoint, it's amazing how you can go from this, like, this is a horrific record. I mean, man, you're losing all the time, to the fact that, hey, you're one of the best coaches in the country. That's why you're a head coach in the NFL.
But here's the thing too, is so the only people that would draw the conclusion that Hugh Jackson wasn't a good coach are people that don't understand how coaching works.
Fans.
Every other exactly. So every other coach in the NFL who's worth their weight in gold is sitting there being like, this guy's a hella good coach, man. He walked into a bad circumstance. Like it's almost consensus that this guy can coach by the people, by his peers. And this is what's really interesting, is other coaches don't care how much people win or lose or anything. They look at the circumstance. Like, yeah, he lost. He was set up to lose.
Yeah, the context is so key in the whole story, right?
And the other coaches know who can coach and who can't coach. And I tell you what, they don't talk about people's win-loss records. They talk about whether the guy or girl can actually coach.
Yeah.
And that's clear to other coaches.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it makes me think of, in your book as well, you talk about some of the phrases and the words and the things in coaching that maybe need a bit of a rethink or that need to be challenged. Can you share a few of those gems, a few of those phrases that I know I heard a lot when I was growing up, that are just become part of the lexicon that maybe need to be scrapped or upgraded?
Yeah. Every word matters. And that, again, it just kind of encapsulates exactly what we're talking about here, is really about thinking how we position things, and not just deferring to, the old kind of terminology or any terminology in particular, like really thinking through what is every word communicating. And the best one that I found was, and people probably have seen this, is a video that I saw on social media of a father teaching his son how to hit baseball off a tee. And the kid hits the first one, no worries. And then he tees up another one, and he says, keep your eye on the ball. Keep your eye on the ball. He repeats it. And the kid kind of looks at him confused now. And then he bends forward and he puts his eye on top of the ball that's sitting there on top of the tee. And, so everyone starts laughing and it's hilarious. but the coaching lesson in it is absolutely brilliant. It's supposed to be this cute little video, but there's such a profound coaching lesson in it. Keep your eye on the ball makes no sense. And the kid is the one that has to point it out to us. Is it like a 2-year-old?
It's a brilliant video because just seeing somebody do that to a baseball, and the kid's obviously being genuine, right? Like if this was a teenager, that the kid's being genuine, and he puts his face right on the ball, and I mean it's brilliant. To your point, I mean it just picture speaks 1,000 words. It's like what kind of stupid tip is this?
Yeah. And we all have them in our lives. We have them in our sports, things that we say that were just part of the popular lexicon. And the point is that we need to just think about the power of those words, because it shape how we perceive the world and how we perceive what we're doing. And so it becomes really important, where now we live in a globalized society where the same things don't mean to different people. We've literally merged the entire world in the last 20 or 30 years, and we're still using the same terminology, and it just doesn't have the same impact. Bring all their own language profile to the table.
Yeah, and I mean, to that point, even just our own self-talk, right? I mean, the way that we converse with ourselves and the things that we say to motivate. And sport, classically, is a lot of negative self-talk, pushing yourself down so that you can get back and rise up to the challenge. But it's that internal monologue that keeps going on. I mean, it's amazing how even the best athletes, as they go up, who don't face those kind of challenges, maybe until they reach the most elite level, the professional level, and now all of a sudden there's doubt and there's negative self-talk, and can be crippling. Because those skills haven't been, developed over time, and to the point of what we're saying, words matter. And I think that's an area that's really developed over the last 5 or 10 years. And when we look at coaching, right, in terms of that communication.
Yeah, that's really what I was getting to with this chapter was, we need to rethink how we think about communication. And so I rethought it and kind of repositioned it a little bit. And the fact that and behavior aren't considered ways of communicating is baffling to me. And I understand why. I understand the academic side of it. But the fact that we essentially, particularly with self-talk, we strip it out and put it in psychology, and then we keep verbal, written over here as communication, means that there's already a distance between the two. But we need to consider self-talk as a communication skill so that we can practice it. So just like every other communication skill that we have, and it's a huge missing one. And then the other one is behavior as a way of communicating. Like your actions are the biggest embodiment of that self-talk. So you also can't exclude them from the conversation as well. So I get academia, I get all this kind of separations that we need to make on that front, but in practice, we have to include them in there so we can practice them.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's got to merge together to be able to put these things into play in real scenarios, isn't it? Because we dissect them into their silos to examine them and to test the theories and to develop the science, but we can kind of get stuck in well, that person does that and that person does this, but on the pitch, or whether it's the coach or the player, all these things are happening simultaneously. It is amazing to see that there are obviously a lot of great programs where those barriers are being broken down, but there's still a lot where they're very obviously still there, right?
Yeah. And huge for leaders too. And to your point earlier, the self-talk one, and finding ways to be kinder to yourself as a leader, and even showing yourself some self-love. That's been the biggest change in my coaching, is my ability to stop being harsh on myself and having that critical voice constantly. To your point, it was kind of ingrained in us. Like we socialized ourselves into that, and letting go of that and putting myself into a state of depletion just from my own self-talk has been huge for me.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fascinating one, because even with my experience working with just different clients and in business settings, and no matter how high up the ladder you go, the negative self-talk. I mean, everyone's always looking up higher to where they want to get to. So the negative self-talk doesn't really change much, or it can get worse as you go up. And it's like, wait a minute, you're the person
Right.
who's accomplished all this. Why? But it can get pretty vicious. And so, yeah, to your point, it's definitely a skill we all need to develop. And Cody, I want to make sure I respect your time here, man. This latest book that you've written, when you, over the course of writing it, what have you noticed about your own coaching or whatnot that has shifted along with the learnings and the writings that you've developed for the book?
Yeah, so the book was a COVID baby, and actually half written another book, and then COVID happened, and opportunistically I started calling around my coaching friends just to check in on them, because it was pretty clear that everyone was a little bit frazzled, and they were also isolated and trying to find their way, but also trying to share lessons. And the thing that just kept coming up was that with the extra time to kind of sit and reflect is, like a lot of people were really lost, and they'd kind of been winging it, and the next season came, so it made this perfect excuse to not take care of themselves and not change their behavior, and
back on the treadmill.
Back on the treadmill. As soon as the Super Bowl's over, it's get back in. Then there's draft, and then straight after draft is rookie camp, and so it just creates this suction. It took everyone in the world having to stop
global pandemic
and sit out in the backyard on their own and stare up into the blue sky for us to realize that something needed to change. And so that was the kind of the birth of the book. Was this isn't my idea. This was coaches coming to me saying, I've realized I need some help with this. I need help. I don't need someone to tell me how to coach, know how to coach. It's me who needs the help. And so my biggest learning is that coaches have got to have coaches, man.
Makes sense, right?
We forget that on their plate, and that they can receive coaching too. And there's very few that have them, whether it's a cost thing, I don't know. It doesn't really make sense in pro sports because we pay hundreds of staff now to do all sorts of things. Surely the coach can have a right-hand man or woman with them. But yeah, there is a group of people that are just kind of lost in the world, and no one's paying attention to them, and they're on television every single day, and they're just being overlooked. Someone needs to offer some support. And so that is what the book is my attempt at saying we need to pay attention to this before someone ends up in the ground and we all have to feel bad about it because we didn't do anything.
Yeah, I mean, we look at health conditions and NBA coaches, NFL coaches. I mean, hypertension, cardiovascular events, prediabetes. I mean, there's a lot of things happening. And so, fantastic book. It's tremendous, whether you're a coach, as in a head coach or an assistant coach, but even if you're a practitioner, nutritionist, strength coach, doctor, medical. I mean, we talked before about this idea of, with managing a chronic condition or helping somebody achieve a goal is coaching. And yet we don't, in these other sort of medical fields, there's no coaching section, right? It's just, and so I think there's a lot of phenomenal parallels in the book that really can help people become better practitioners. So, thanks for writing the book. Fantastic. Where can people pick up the book? Where can people keep connected with all the great work that you do?
Yeah, Mark, just one last point on that is, I've had teachers and CEOs and people reach out to me and say, I saw myself in this book. So it is written through the lens of head coaches, definitely. And it's, team sport head coaches at the elite level. But yeah, already in the first couple of weeks of it being out, I've had people from other disciplines reach out and say, this is the same, but within my world. And so that's really cool
It's nice, right?
Yeah. And so to your point is, it doesn't need to be about sport necessarily. I think the lessons there, and they're quite universal. Yeah. So the book's only available on Amazon all around the world, so you can grab it from
Most
there.
people get their books on Amazon. So
yeah, and they mail it straight to you. You don't even need to go to the store.
Yeah.
And then CodyRoyle.com is my centralized website. It's got my podcast, my books are on there, or links to my social media. Very active on Twitter. and very easy to find with a name like Cody Royle. There aren't too many of us floating around. Same as you, mate. Like there's not too many Marc Bubbs floating around.
Yeah, you get the Bubbs and think of the funny last name, man. You're good to go. Awesome, man. Well, listen, again, appreciate you coming on. Fantastic book. If anybody listening in, it's definitely one that's going to be on the shelf, because no matter what discipline you're in, it's going to make you a better practitioner. And to your point, even learn a little bit more about yourself so you can take care of yourself a little bit better, so you can become better at whatever discipline or job that you have. So appreciate the time, Cody, and we'll have to get you back on again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. And we'll do the away leg as well. I'll have you on mine. Looking forward to that chat.
Nice.
I'll put you on the grill.
There we go, man. All right, good stuff. Listen, appreciate it.
Thanks, mate.